Dear viewers, this is a story that would shake every belief about fate, love, and the choices we make when life leaves us no options. In the summer of 2017, in the bustling city of Atlanta, Georgia, a young man burdened by poverty and responsibility stumbled into a series of events that no one could have imagined. His days had been filled with endless struggle, his nights consumed by fear of losing everything he cared about. Then, when desperation reached its peak, an encounter with a powerful woman offered him a way out that seemed almost too good to be real. But the price of that salvation was unlike anything he had ever faced before, and what he uncovered inside her vast home revealed a secret so shocking it threatened to unravel not only his life, but the very foundation of his understanding of destiny itself. Michael Harris was 27 years old, a young man from Atlanta whose life had been shaped by hardship long before his time. After his father's sudden death from a heart attack, the weight of survival fell squarely on his shoulders, leaving him as the only provider for a fragile household. His mother, Deborah, battled breast cancer that drained her strength and demanded costly treatments, while his younger brother, Tyler, still in high school, dreamed of one day attending college. Michael carried their hopes with him each morning as he rose before dawn and returned home long after midnight, his body aching but his mind unable to rest. He juggled 3 jobs, driving a taxi through crowded streets, hauling boxes in warehouses under suffocating heat, and standing guard in dimly lit buildings while the city slept. Yet the money slipped through his fingers faster than he could earn it, devoured by medical bills, rent, and debts that multiplied with every passing month. Collection agencies left threatening messages on his phone, and letters from creditors piled on the kitchen table like a mountain of unfulfilled promises. Some nights, menacing knocks rattled their apartment door, filling the air with dread as Michael feared losing the little they had left. At the hospital, doctors spoke with cold detachment, warning that treatment would not continue unless payment was made in advance. Each refusal cut deeper into his spirit, reminding him that poverty was not just about hunger or unpaid bills, but about watching those he loved slip away because he could not give them more. His brother's textbooks often lay unopened because Tyler worked evenings to help, sacrificing his studies to support the family. Michael looked in the mirror and saw lines of exhaustion carved into his face, eyes shadowed by sleepless nights and relentless worry. What should have been the years of building dreams and chasing ambitions had become a relentless cycle of sacrifice, fear, and survival. For Michael, life felt like a treadmill he could never step off, each step heavier than the last. Each breath a reminder that time was running out faster than he could keep up on a sweltering July afternoon. The kind of day when the air in Atlanta felt heavy and unyielding, Michael Harris ducked into a small barbecue restaurant on the city's outskirts. The place was modest, with faded posters on the walls and the scent of smoked meat clinging to the air. But for Michael it was a rare indulgence, a brief escape from the crushing routine of his life. He paid for a simple meal with crumpled bills, carefully counting every dollar before sliding the food into a worn paper bag. As he stepped outside, the harsh sunlight struck his eyes, and for a moment he paused on the sidewalk to adjust to the brightness. That was when his gaze fell upon a vehicle parked at the curb, its glossy black surface gleaming like polished obsidian. The Cadillac Escalade stood out against the modest surroundings, its tinted windows and chrome accents marking it as a symbol of wealth and power. From the back seat, the door opened with deliberate precision, and a woman emerged. She was tall for her age, her posture perfectly upright, her movements imbued with authority. She wore a tailored, ivory-colored suit that seemed to radiate both elegance and control, and heavy jewelry caught the sunlight with every step she took. Her silver hair was styled immaculately, and her face, though lined with the weight of years, carried an undeniable strength. This was Evelyn Monroe, a figure whose name was spoken in Atlanta's business circles with reverence and intimidation alike. Owner of hotel chains, logistics companies, and vast tracts of real estate, she was the kind of woman who had shaped industries and crushed rivals. Michael froze, not from recognition, but from the sheer gravity of her presence. Passers-by lowered their eyes as she walked, and even the restaurant owner stepped outside to watch respectfully. Evelyn's gaze fixed on Michael as though she had been expecting him. Her eyes were sharp, filled with the kind of knowledge that unsettled rather than comforted. In that instant he felt exposed, as though his struggles, his debts, and his private fears were no longer hidden within his modest life. She studied him with unnerving certainty, her expression revealing nothing but her intention. For Michael, the world around him seemed to fall silent, the noise of traffic and conversation fading into a hollow stillness. In that charged moment, standing in the unforgiving summer heat with a bag of food in his hands, he sensed that his life had just shifted in a direction he could neither predict nor control. A week later, Michael and Evelyn stood before a judge in the quiet courtroom, their signatures placed neatly on official papers that bound them together in a marriage that seemed more like a business agreement than a union of hearts. Almost immediately, the weight on Michael's family began to ease. His mother was admitted into a private hospital where attentive doctors and nurses provided the kind of care she had never been able to afford before. His younger brother received a fully paid contract for school, the dream of a future suddenly secured. For the first time in years, Michael's phone stopped buzzing with threats from creditors, and the constant fear of eviction seemed to dissolve overnight. Yet as his family's burdens lifted, Michael's own sense of unease only grew stronger. When he first arrived at Evelyn's mansion on the edge of Atlanta, he realized he had stepped into a world so far removed from his own that it felt unreal. The gates opened slowly, revealing a sprawling estate where manicured lawns stretched endlessly and fountains rose high into the air, sparkling under the southern sun. Inside, the house itself resembled a palace. Polished marble staircases climbed into the upper floors. Chandeliers of crystal cast golden light across vast halls, and priceless paintings from Europe and America filled the walls with silent stories of power and wealth. Every piece of furniture seemed carefully chosen, every corner perfectly staged, as though the mansion itself was meant to remind any visitor of Evelyn Monroe's authority and reach. The staff moved quietly through the corridors, their presence almost ghost-like. They spoke in whispers, never raising their voices, and their faces carried an air of restrained tension. No one made unnecessary eye contact, and whenever Evelyn entered a room, her employees straightened instantly, their reverence laced with a subtle fear. Michael noticed how carefully they obeyed her unspoken rules, as though a single mistake might cost them their place in this carefully constructed kingdom. Yet among all the grandeur, one detail unsettled him most. On the second floor of the mansion stood a large oak door, reinforced with sleek electronic locks that glowed faintly with red lights. Security cameras pointed directly at it, and from time to time Michael spotted guard passing near the area, though no one ever explained why such vigilance was necessary inside her own home. Each time he asked, the answer was always the same, delivered with practiced calmness. That section of the house was reserved for Evelyn alone. The forbidden door became a shadow in his mind, an unanswered question in a world where everything else had been laid out in polished perfection. Weeks slipped by, and Michael gradually adjusted to the rhythms of the mansion, though the sense of unease never left him. Evelyn was rarely at rest. Her days were consumed with calls from boardrooms in New York, meetings with partners overseas, and frequent trips that pulled her away from the estate. Yet every evening she returned to dine with Michael in the cavernous dining hall, where chandeliers sparkled above and silence lingered between them. The meals were elaborate, prepared by a staff that moved with near-military precision, but despite the richness of the food, the atmosphere often felt heavy. Evelyn would watch him with eyes that seemed to carry unspoken thoughts, her gaze steady and unreadable. Michael could not escape the impression that she was guarding something, a secret woven into her very presence. One late night, after wandering through the dim corridors of the mansion, Michael paused near the forbidden section of the second floor. From behind the locked door came a sound that froze him in place. It was Evelyn's voice, but it did not resemble the measured tone of an 83-year-old woman. Instead, it rang with youth, passion, and intensity, filled with an energy that felt impossibly out of place. The cadence of her speech was faster, her words carried fire, as though they belonged to someone decades younger. Michael pressed himself against the wall, strained to catch more, but the words blurred into fragments that only heightened his confusion. When the voice faded and silence returned, he retreated, his pulse racing, questions clawing at his mind. Days later, he encountered someone who deepened his suspicions. Evelyn's personal assistant, Camilla, was a striking young woman of 25, sharp-eyed and graceful, who had worked for Evelyn for several years. Unlike the other staff, she carried herself with a quiet confidence, and her conversations with Michael, though brief, hinted at a deeper understanding of the house's mysteries. In a rare moment of candor, Camilla spoke with a half-smile that concealed as much as it revealed, suggesting that what lay behind the locked door was something he was not ready to discover. Her words lingered in his thoughts, feeding the restlessness that had already taken root. From that moment, Michael found himself drawn again and again toward the forbidden part of the house. Every glance at the locked door seemed to whisper promises of revelation. Every unanswered question pushed him closer to breaking the invisible rules that bound him. What had once been a quiet curiosity grew into an obsession, and the mansion, for all its grandeur, became a cage filled with secrets that demanded to be uncovered. The day Evelyn flew to New York, Faye had loosened the only lock that guarded the mansion's deepest secret. Michael found the heavy door slightly ajar, a hairline gap that invited him into a room that resembled a private museum more than any ordinary part of a home. He stepped inside as if crossing a threshold into someone else's memory, and the air seemed to hold the weight of years. Shelves and tables were covered with yellowed newspapers, framed headlines chronicling business triumphs and scandals, stacks of correspondence tied with faded ribbons, and albums whose pages crackled when turned. Portraits in polished frames showed faces from decades past, captured in moments of laughter and pretense, and in the center of the room a collection of photographs lay arranged like evidence on a table. As he sifted through them, time collapsed into a single impossible discovery. There, smiling in one sunlit photograph, dated 1985, was his father as a young man, arm in arm with a much younger Evelyn Monroe. They were posed at what looked like a business charity event, their closeness intimate and natural, eyes bright with an affection that no later rumor had suggested. More images followed. Candid shots of the two of them traveling together, attending dinners and openings, letters tucked between photos in a hand Michael recognized before his brain could refuse it. The Lupin script, the private jokes, the vows that promised permanence. The letters were not the formal correspondence of business partners, but the raw, intimate language of lovers, promises of devotion, plans for a shared future, references to nights and places that would have meant nothing to the world, but everything to the two of them. As he read, a pattern emerged in black ink and sepia tones, a relationship that had been genuine, then severed. The correspondence shifted from ardent declarations to a starker tone. Apologies, please, then silence. One letter bore the unmistakable sting of humiliation. Hints that his father had walked away from promises, had refused to acknowledge the relationship in public, and had chosen convenience over commitment. The discovery forced an avalanche of memories and questions. Michael's image of his father, long idolized and simplified by grief, fractured into new shapes, some tender, some ugly. He felt as though he had been given access not only to secret pages, but to an invisible history that had quietly governed his family's fate. When Evelyn returned unexpectedly and found him there, she did not react with rage or panic. Instead, her composure was that of someone who had rehearsed every possible discovery and still stood ready to explain. She allowed him to see the careful chronology of a life that had been built around an impossible love and a final betrayal. The narrative, she revealed, was one of deep affection, followed by public humiliation when his father rejected a promise of marriage and intimacy. It was born of hurt that hardened into resolve. Over the years, she had watched from a distance as the life she imagined with his father unraveled, and when she learned of his death, she had redirected decades of restrained longing and anger into a plan. That plan had included watching the sun grow, calculating the precise moment when desperation might make him vulnerable, and engineering intervention to bind him legally and financially to her world. Michael felt the cold fact of manipulation settle in his chest like a stone. The charity that had lifted his family from immediate peril now also gleamed as a carefully placed instrument of retribution. But alongside the evidence of orchestration, there were markers of something more complicated. Evelyn's notes and private entries betrayed nights of regret, reflections on loneliness, and unexpectedly pages where her language softened when she wrote of Michael himself, observations of his kindness, his discipline, the quiet dignity with which he carried burdens. As Michael read through the margins and personal annotations, he realized that the plan had changed over time. The methodical architecture of revenge had been real, but so had been the slow erosion of cold calculation by a dawning recognition of the man she had lured into her life. The truth that unspooled before him was messy and human, a mixture of vengeance and yearning, a retrieval of lost affection that had been contaminated by decades of pain. Confronted with the archive of his father's shadow romance and the evidence of Evelyn's deliberate pursuit, Michael experienced a rushing tide of emotions, betrayal, grief reborn in new forms, and a bewildered pity. The room that had promised illumination had instead exposed the tangled motives behind lives he had never known he was connected to. Standing amid photographs and letters, he felt small and enormous at once. Small because he had been manipulated by forces older than his memory. Enormous because the history he now held changed the very story of where he came from. The revelation did not offer tidy answers or moral absolutes. It left instead a raw, painful clarity about the past and a heavy awareness that the life he had accepted as salvation had been, at least in part. Michael was left shaken by the weight of what he had uncovered. The life he had thought of as a miracle now revealed itself as the result of long-laid plans rooted in bitterness. For days he felt like a pawn in a game he had never agreed to play, his choices reduced to echoes of decisions made decades before his birth. Yet when he looked at Evelyn, no longer the untouchable figure of power, but a woman trembling under the burden of her own history, something shifted inside him. Her tears were not the tears of a calculating manipulator, but of someone who had carried loneliness like a second skin, who had held on to a wound so long it had become part of her identity. Michael began to see past the cold architecture of revenge and into the human being behind it. Their relationship changed slowly, as if thawing after a long winter. The guarded conversations at the dining table turned into hesitant exchanges, and eventually into long nights of honesty. Evelyn spoke of her youth, her struggles as a black woman in a world that dismissed her, the sacrifices she had made to build an empire. Michael listened, not as a victim of her schemes, but as a man beginning to understand the layers of hurt and resilience that had shaped her. In return, he shared his own dreams beyond mere survival, his hope to give his brother a chance at a better life, his desire to build something meaningful of his own. What had started as a hollow marriage grew into a fragile companionship built on truth and the willingness to see each other not as adversaries, but as people bound together by circumstance and choice. A year later, Evelyn's health began to fail. The empire she had constructed from nothing could not protect her from the limits of her body. Doctors came and went, offering the best care that money could buy, but the decline was steady and irreversible. Michael stayed by her side through the long weeks of illness, no longer out of obligation, but out of compassion. In her final days, she signed over her vast fortune and businesses to him, not as a weapon of control, but as a gift of trust. In her last moments, she spoke with peace, no longer consumed by revenge, but comforted by the knowledge that love, even found so late, could heal what hatred had once ruled. When Evelyn was laid to rest, the funeral was attended by business leaders, politicians, and families who had once feared or admired her. Michael stood before them, not with anger, but with solemn gratitude. He admitted aloud what many never knew, that she had sought revenge but found love instead. He forgave her, not because her actions were just, but because forgiveness was the only path to freedom for them both. In the years that followed, Michael married Camilla, whose quiet strength had been a steady presence throughout the storm. Together they built a life not defined by secrets, but by openness. A portion of Evelyn's fortune was transformed into a foundation that provided housing, education, and medical care for struggling families across Atlanta, the very people Michael had once lived among. The mansion that once echoed with fear and hidden motives became a place of laughter and renewal. The lesson of his journey lingered as a truth too powerful to ignore. Even the darkest intentions could be reshaped when confronted with genuine kindness, and love had the ability to turn revenge into redemption. For Michael, the inheritance was not only wealth or status, but the understanding that forgiveness was the most radical gift one human being could offer another, designed as repayment for a wound inflicted decades earlier.